This is Call the Psychiatrist, the show where psychiatrists answer your questions. I'm Dr. David Handley.
And I'm Dr. Abby Snavely.
In this episode, a listener has a question about cheating on his therapist. And our second question comes from someone who's getting tired of virtual appointments and would like to get back in the office and see your therapist in person.
Say you like me, you better count the ways.
Listening to this podcast does not mean we have a doctor-patient relationship. Our intention is to educate and entertain you. Nothing we say is intended or recommended as a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your own physician or other qualified healthcare professional regarding any medical questions or conditions. You know, I was thinking there's a lot of things about doing a podcast that felt risky. I think we can save our podcast neuroses for another episode.
Or a series of episodes.
It could take a while to talk about.
Okay, yeah. I'm just saying.
But there's one thing is the fact that the content of the show is determined by people we usually don't know. Right. And I think we've lucked out with some really great listeners.
Indeed.
And what I was thinking about with this first question is that this is just an example of a topic I would never have thought about covering. It would never be in the syllabus of my mind. So I just think it's really interesting. So again, our show is completely dependent on the people that listen. So we'll see how this goes.
Yeah, keep it coming, folks.
So this listener asked us to withhold their name. So this will be another anonymous.
Okay. I'm seeing two therapists at the same time, but they don't know about each other. I kind of feel like I'm cheating. The first is a trauma therapist to help me overcome some things that happened in my childhood. We talk, do some EMDR, chair work, and focus on helping me overcome my past. We had a rupture earlier this summer that sent me into a tailspin. It was at the same time as her vacation, and I was angry and needed some extra support, so I made an appointment with the second therapist. It turns out I really like them too. The style is different and engaging. I felt immediately understood and valued. I thought I'd make a complete switch. However, when my therapist came back from vacation, we had a surprisingly good session. I was prepared to say goodbye, but I felt so seen and understood. I didn't want this to end. Now I'm caught between them both, and I haven't come clean with either. It's making me feel like a cheater. Can you see two therapists at the same time? Do they need to know about each other?
So I think I just want to cut right to the question. I think, yes, you can see two therapists, and they don't have to know about each other. And you can likely benefit from each of them. However, I think understanding why you're doing this could be really helpful to you.
Yeah. And then, because I thought you were going to say, but the real question is it a good idea? But, right. Can you? Yeah. It seems like you're doing it already.
Yeah. I mean, it's not going to hurt, but the thing that grabs me. I don't
know. Go ahead though. Yeah.
Well, the thing that grabs me is that, so there's this rupture with therapist number one, and he said he was angry. I'm guessing he was betrayed, felt abandoned because of the vacation. Right. But I would say he hasn't actually repaired that relationship if he hasn't been honest about the lengths he went to replace her.
I think that's right. And I think that the is it a good idea question all comes down to the, like you said, the why. The initial why was because he was hurt, right? He was hurt. He felt abandoned. The therapist went on vacation. In the text, he says, I needed some extra support. I'm not sure if it was only support, though, but I don't know. I guess we should have the caveat that we're going to make a lot of assumptions or guesses here.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Of course.
Because I'm wondering if keeping therapist number two is actually some insurance against the next time therapist number one upsets him.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons the first therapist needs to know what's going on, because their relationship is actually tenuous. Even though he's enjoying it right now, he can bounce as soon as he gets frustrated again. So the next vacation, the next holiday, whatever. I guess you could even say he might do that from therapist number two to therapist number one if he gets frustrated there too.
I think this is very similar, but maybe a slightly different twist. I also see it as a way, and you're right, it could go both directions, but I think it's definitely a way to keep from becoming as emotionally dependent on therapist number one. And so in that regard, I mean, I might say it could hurt, because I think if this person is in two such relationships, then he doesn't have to completely invest in either one, because there's always a backup, right? Like it's not like he's all the way in to either and along for the ride, whatever that might entail.
Yeah, and you've got to wonder, okay, well, I'm wondering, like, what is this person like in partnership or in romantic relationships?
Right.
Like, is this someone that maybe not unfaithful, but is this someone who's always looking, never quite sure that the person they have is enough? Is it a commitment thing? Does he leave relationships as soon as they get hard? I have no idea.
Is it FOMO? Like, if I totally commit to this one person, like, what if there's somebody else better out there?
Yeah.
Right? And I mean, even as it's phrased, I mean, sometimes we talk about, breaking up with the therapist or cheating. These are dating type or partnership type words, not by accident. Because I think that there is some assumed exclusivity unless you've made an explicit arrangement for an open relationship or some sort of bigamy or polyamory or something. And the question asker is the only one who knows about this.
Yeah, I was going to say, to be clear, it's actually, there are times when having two therapists who are using different modalities comes up. But in those situations, each therapist knows about the other. So, and I mean, he mentioned he was doing EMDR with therapist number one. And so, again, that's not that uncommon that somebody might refer a person to another therapist. They might go see that person, do the other modality, come back. But it is, it's with the understanding that there's a reason for the other relationship, the dual relationship. So,
and not just as insurance or a fallback. And it's not clear from how this is written that the second therapist has a really distinct modality, just that they're more engaging and a different style.
Yeah. So I guess it's not so much that you have two, it's the fact that you don't want to talk to them about having two. I think that's the place you got to be curious. I think the listener has to be curious about what's motivating that.
Absolutely. And so that is from their perspective. I also, obviously think about the therapist's shoes. And if I think I'm somebody's one and only, or in any kind of, right? Like, I mean, that.
Have you been cheated on by a patient?
Not without being told. I have been, the other therapist or maybe the first therapist, and then we bring in a third, if you will. But everybody knows about it, and those are kind of special situations for a good reason.
Yeah, I remember someone cheating on me.
What
but they
happened?
they ultimately told me and said they liked me better and that I had won the competition, but it was a competition I wasn't aware it was happening. So
right?
And then I guess you're right. I've also been the one, I was the second therapist in this scenario. And then ultimately that person terminated with the first. And that's an awkward position to be in, as if you somehow stolen someone away from another therapist. But I think most of us can talk this through and feel okay about it.
I mean, I think so. And if someone comes in and says they have someone else, predictably, one of my first questions is going to be, have you talked to that other person about this, right? Either that you're going to have two or that you want to switch or whatever the issue is. And I think some people really want to disappear. But again, I'm not always totally comfortable with that. Of course, they're free to do whatever they want. But, sometimes it is maybe some work on our part to say, like, you can at least, I would encourage you to at least tell your other therapist goodbye, right? Like, don't just ghost them.
Yeah.
Or I think, or as always, I think it could be helpful to go back and talk to them about what went on. But sometimes people just want to get away. And I think that's okay too. I mean, I think that it's possible to do good work with someone talking about how their relationship with their previous therapist ended. But all of these scenarios we're talking about are not sort of indeterminate, just simultaneous therapy that goes on forever.
So if you were in this scenario as one of the therapists, would you make our listener choose?
I don't know. I mean, if it were the scenario where one person was doing one modality and the other was doing another, okay. But I think the very fact that the letter writer has kept it a secret, we don't know how long, but a while, right? Summer vacation. So at least for a couple of months, I think that means that there's something up. And so I wouldn't make them choose immediately. I would want to explore, but I don't know. I don't know that I would feel like it was terribly ethical, especially if I thought there was a lot of crossover. But it ultimately wouldn't be my call. I wouldn't say, "Oh, I won't see you if you don't choose." But I would view this as like a pretty primary issue in the therapy till we figured something out.
It's got to be expensive too, just paying two therapists every week.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what do you think? What would you do? Would you make him choose?
No, I was thinking if I were therapist number one, I would be so curious about where the breakdown happened. Like
Right.
initially I would think that I had not served him well, that there was something
Right.
either about that rupture that I wasn't aware of. I didn't understand the
Right.
magnitude of it, or maybe I had just simply missed something.
Mm-hmm.
So I think understanding that would be really important. So once I got to the other side of that, I'm not sure. There's not enough in this question
No.
to really explain that he did something in a healthy way. I guess
Exactly. I mean, I think that well said. I mean, I know you're trying to be diplomatic, but it's like, okay. And you're right. If this is about this person's relationship or similar to this person's relationship history, then you might have a really good interpretation to make. I can also imagine that after this happened, coming back from the vacation, thinking it's about the rupture, maybe thinking you repaired it or thinking something's still off, and either internally or with the patient working really hard explicitly to figure out what's going on. Because my guess is that, if they're doing real work with this other person as well, that something, I don't know, qualitatively is going to just feel different. And so I could also imagine that, it's like, well, for the last 3 months, I've tried to figure out what's going on. This is what has been going on.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, and then how do we understand this? Which is also, I mean, to be fair, our patients lie to us about things all the time.
Yeah, I was just thinking,
and I don't get my ego hurt about that, right? Like, I usually think there's like a reason for it, even if it seems counterproductive.
Yeah, there's often like somebody will reveal something that finally everything falls into place.
Right. Yeah,
like,
that's what I mean.
Gosh, I've been like around this maze for a year, and if we had only been able to talk about it early on,
right,
it would have made this so much easier. But
right, but for whatever reason they couldn't, right?
Mm-hmm,
like this is how they had to get to it, and so.
Yeah. But I would always, and in my mind, there's this blank space. I'm like, there's something I don't know because I can't make sense of this. And then finally, they'll feel comfortable enough where something will have happened where you finally get that last puzzle piece. You're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's better said. But that's totally my fantasy of what it is like right now to be the first therapist.
Yeah. Although I was thinking, what if all your patients are cheating on you, but you wouldn't know if they didn't tell you?
That's right. I would never know.
I was sort of imagining though, what if they come in and like they have all these massive insights or they're like rapidly getting better?
And you're like, oh my God, I'm so good. How did you do that on your own in between? Like, my goodness.
Right.
I mean,
we weren't even breadcrumbing to that yet. Like, and you already did it. You did it.
Breakthrough. Like, I guess in that case, maybe it benefits everyone. Who knows? But then I don't know what I'm for, but I guess they could just be impressing me, Right. They just want my approval.
Yeah. Well, I think, again, in summary, I would just say this is a great opportunity to understand yourself better, to dig into the motivation behind some of this. It's more than just how it's been described here. There's something about how you manage that frustration and that disappointment that I think will be really helpful. I think it'll be, this could be a great breakthrough once you address it.
Okay. So yeah, you gotta go talk to somebody about it. Probably therapist number one.
Yeah. Start there.
Yeah. Start there. Very good.
All right. Well, let's take a break. And when we get back, we have a listener who wants to hear how COVID changed our relationship with our patients.
Okay. We're back.
Our next question comes from Ariana. How did COVID change your relationship with your clients? I'm wondering because I feel a shift. We experienced something together that was bigger than both of us. I got to see the inside of his house. He got to see the inside of mine. It was strangely bonding. The only problem for me is Zoom. My therapist still has not returned to his office, and I miss him. I suppose there's some ways where it's easier to be more candid over Zoom because of the distance, but sitting across from each other felt closer, more safe. I've not asked him yet what the reservation is. I'm afraid to learn that he's never going back to his office. I wonder if it's worth doing Zoom or finding a new therapist who offers the kind of therapy I crave. Do you have any thoughts? Have you returned in person? Did COVID change the relationship with your clients?
I was thinking that we should talk about our experiences with Zoom and telepsych, either shaped by the pandemic or not, and then what we see as the pros and cons of each of these type of treatments. And then I'd like to circle back around and answer some of Ariana's questions, and we can brainstorm about what we think might be going on for her.
Okay.
I know you have done more, I don't know what you would call it, telehealth, telepsych, online therapy for longer. You didn't just switch over because of COVID. Is that right?
Yeah. So I had a few years before the pandemic, mostly because I'd left the city and moved to a smaller town. I'd closed a practice and terminated everybody, but then people kind of wanted to join up again. And the only way to actually accomplish that was to do remote therapy. And I had resisted that for a long time. And I had read the studies and that the outcomes are about the same. But I didn't like it. I didn't want to do it. It felt different. But they kind of forced me to do it. And so by the time COVID came around, I already had the infrastructure and some familiarity with it. So that didn't feel as much of a big deal to me as to people who it was their first time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I also had been resistant so much as I didn't offer it really. Sometimes on the phone, and we can talk about the differences there. But really, I think that even as a relatively youngish psychiatrist, I think I am still traditional as we tend to be, and paying a lot of attention to the frame and some of the formality, which I do think that there is an advantage to. So, switching over to Zoom was a big change for me and my patients, but it was also an abrupt change. And it was also, like Ariana is hinting at, in the midst of this pandemic. So, yes, maybe bonding, but also pretty jarring. I don't know. I at least wasn't really ready or hadn't conceptualized what it would mean to move over so rapidly. And it was, of course, like everything else. It was like, oh, we'll do this for 2 weeks. Okay, we'll do it for 2 more weeks. Oh, wow. Now I don't know when we're going back. And so I don't know if that colored some of my experience of it. And on one hand, I felt lucky and glad that I could continue to work, both for my family, but also for my patients. But it was not, the kind of switch over for me was more like under duress, even though I have noticed some good things about it that have made me continue to offer it, even though it's much more safe to be back in our offices now.
Yeah, it was, Ariana talked about it being a shared experience because everything was different and everyone was trying to adapt. And I think it's unique in that so both the therapist and the patient are trying to manage something simultaneously, which that's not how therapy tends to work. So
Right.
it was interesting to get the same information, possibly processing things very differently, but it was humanizing. You've talked, I think, in maybe an earlier episode that we all had to lighten up a little bit because of COVID.
Yeah.
We had to be a little less rigid. And I think ultimately that's for the better. I think the thing that was really hard with COVID and the forced remote work or whatever were the unintended disclosures or at least
Absolutely.
uncontrolled disclosures. Never in a million years would I have taken my kid to work, but there she was, flattened against the wall behind me thinking she was off camera because she'd made herself two-dimensional or something.
Right.
It was awkward, but it was awkward to me. It wasn't awkward to my patient. And again, it humanized me. It's just, there is something about it being uncontrolled that probably was most uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I moved a couple times during this. And I mean, I guess maybe people didn't always know that, but the background would change. Any of the sort of continuity that I wanted to try to provide was gone because, my kids were doing online school at home. So it wasn't even always an option for me to go to my office to work online. I don't know. I think that is a downside. I think the distractions, which is maybe some of the same thing. Not only did they find out you had a child, but maybe your child was distracting, or my cat's walking across the keyboard, or somebody rings the doorbell to make a delivery. It's just a lot less control over the environment.
The distractions are tough. And there's also, as you were saying, there's sometimes something to be said for the formality of getting up and getting out of the house because, for example, you can't be driving. Like that would be a boundary that I didn't have a hard time saying, saying no to. You can't be driving and paying attention to this session. But then it's harder to ask somebody not to pop up and then take their phone to the kitchen or they're, they're not as focused sometimes.
I think they're not as focused. I think sometimes I would get to see their pets or children or houses. Sometimes that was illuminating. Sometimes it was funny. And I guess that's the more shared moments. But you're right. It also, I think, gave people permission or a structure to not prioritize the therapy as much. Yeah, to be making coffee or talking to their kids, or sometimes letting other people pop in. I wasn't always sure that they were having the privacy they needed.
Yeah.
I ended up, I don't know, and this still sometimes happens, a fair number of folks have to take these calls in their car so that they can have privacy. And I guess like that's not really a problem. I think it's sort of uncomfortable for them. But it's like, okay, the only way that I can get it so, my spouse and my family is not going to talk to me is to like go sit in the garage. Which, whatever that says about boundaries and otherwise. So, I mean, I think that can be a downside. And in the same way, I think that making interpretations about that is harder. Whereas if someone is distracted in the office or late even, or, let's say poorly groomed, whatever it is, we might be able to make a clinical assessment, but also interpret something about it. Whereas the at-home stuff is either easier to hide behind or just a lot muddier.
Yeah, it's messy for sure.
It's messy, right? And it's like, can I make an interpretation about someone unconsciously avoiding me or not wanting to see me because their Zoom link doesn't work? I don't know, right? Like that might be right on, or it might just be like a technical error that nobody can help.
Yeah, and I found that it's so much harder if it's someone that I don't know well. So when I talked about my experience doing video conferencing or whatever, those are people that I had a long-standing relationship that was face-to-face, had been well established. And so switching to online was not a problem. I mean, it really, I don't think much was lost. I did find though, when I was meeting somebody for the first time, like it took me longer, I think, to
totally.
Yeah, it's to kind of get in the groove or to get the narrative right in my mind. And I don't know what that was. There was something that felt distant, or it is not the same in my experience. It is not the same. It doesn't mean that the outcome is not the same, like that we don't eventually get there, but the process does feel different for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way it is a different skill set, because you're right. I mean, I actually think that I had more people that would have kind of one session and then decide not to continue than typical. Like there was a few, and you're right. I mean, it was my impression too. It was like, we are not connecting. They're walking around with their phone in their house. Like, I can't pin this person down. I don't understand what's happening. And then we might make another appointment and they would cancel it. And I don't know. I don't have a big enough sample size to say much about it, but there's like a few that stand out in my mind. And some of that might have been my skill set too, in terms of just getting better at different, picking up on different cues. Obviously, there's not eye contact. Obviously, there's limited or a different type of body language.
Sometimes when I hear people say, oh, you don't get all the nonverbal cues, and I agreed with that intellectually, but then when I think about it, after face-to-face, I love a good phone session. So I don't need the nonverbal cues, apparently. So I don't know. There's something about phone that works really well for me.
I think the phone is fine. I think that the Zoom camera is tricky because you're getting nonverbal cues, but it's through a distorted lens, literally, that is hard for me to calibrate my brain to, right? Like, is that shifty eye contact, or do they have another screen up, or are they just looking at my little face in a box? Like, I don't know. I don't know what people are doing. And I don't know if they're uncomfortable because they're in their car, or because, right? Or because they're like uncomfortable with the subject matter. I mean, I don't know, why people are moving in that way. So yeah, I think phone is fine. And I think phone, especially if you know someone, is easier to connect with. There's not a delay also in the audio, which seems easier to me as well.
One thing I love about the phone, this is just, I guess I'm disclosing my own personal habits, but I can just physically get really comfortable. Like I can put my feet up, I can lean back, I can stretch my back, I can doodle. I can
lie down.
I feel like, and sometimes I'm actually more present just because I'm not.
Because you don't have to monitor your body language either, right?
Yeah, right.
I'm not studying you. Like
you're sort of freeing it up a bit. Yeah.
Like pace around the office, look out the window, get wild and sit in the patient chair, not my chair.
I know. It's a whole different experience over there.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. So no, I don't know. I mean, I think that is all good. So I think it's the distortion that bothers me more. But I also, sometimes I do too much. I talk more on the phone. I I
Like
think
you want them to know you're there.
I
Like
want, yes,
the silences
exactly.
are harder to manage.
The silences are harder.
Yeah.
The silences I definitely know how to read as well.
Mm,
If the person's not in person.
mm.
So, it's okay. Like that's, I am glad that we can do it. I don't know. So you're right. I think that for the phone, the not being scrutinized is a bonus. I will also put a plug in for the fact that not being watched can be accomplished by someone lying on the couch.
Mhm.
But in terms of the pros of specifically the Zoom therapy, I think convenience is the main one that I can think of.
Yeah, it's all about convenience, right?
Yeah.
There's no commuting, there's no parking, there's no waiting room.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's all about convenience for sure.
Right. But I actually, I don't know. I think that there's something to be said for that. People's lives are busy. I also think, just in that same way that people aren't always prioritizing it when they're at home, I think that by not needing to drive somewhere, I think people are not always in the mindset, especially when they maybe are working on the computer or working over Zoom. I think sometimes just being able to click over to another meeting doesn't really have the person kind of be in their therapy zone. And similarly, I've had patients comment on this as well. If they don't have the transition time back to the rest of their life, I don't think sometimes the session gets integrated as well. Sometimes I wonder if we don't get as emotionally deep, or someone is, less likely to get really emotional because they know that they have to be on a work call 5 minutes after we get off. Whereas if they had to drive a half an hour back to work, I think they might be a little more free to cry or get a little more undone because they had more time to put themselves back together.
Yeah, it's less special.
Yeah.
And for some people, getting up, taking a shower, putting on clean clothes, and coming to the office is actually therapeutic. It's actually maybe the one thing they did that week. And I've had people say that, like, "Oh, this is the first time I've brushed my teeth this week, so I had to come into the office."
Right. Or left the house.
Yeah, and so that's really that's a necessary thing sometimes, I think, to get people engaged. So
yeah, and letting people, who have agoraphobia stay at home, or social anxiety or whatever. I mean, there was jokes abounding about people had been preparing for quarantine their whole lives, but there's something to be said for getting out of your comfort zone usually.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's mostly about convenience, and I don't think we should knock it. I think my preference might be to meet somebody in person at least a few times, and then, see what they prefer and what makes sense, and continue to have honest, open discussions about what works or doesn't work about either location.
I think 100%. Yeah, I think a hybrid model is probably the best way to go. I prefer that if I can still get it those first few sessions. Also, where I live, just from a safety standpoint, people driving in the snow and overpasses and everything, like it's really important. Sometimes I see people in warm weather, and then we do remote through the winter. So I don't know. I think there's lots of combinations. I think this is overall probably a good thing. I'm not sure about 100% virtual. I don't know. I have my own, I guess, bias or opinion or whatever.
No, I tend to agree. You're right. I never thought about that with the snow, whether for safety reasons, whether it's snow or a pandemic or even a cold or something like that, right? Or people whose children have to stay home from school sick, if they can let the kid watch a video and come do their therapy instead of missing it totally, like that's better for everyone.
Yeah, it really, again, maybe that's more than just the standard.
It's not just convenience, like that's flexibility, right? Like it's accommodation that accommodates better for life than you must be here in my office at this time. And that seems kinder. So I think overall it is good. I don't know. Do we have anything else to say, or do we want to talk about Ariana and her therapist?
Yeah, let's talk about Ariana.
I'm really curious for her, because it sounds like she likes her therapist a lot. They went through this. They have a good relationship. And yet there's something about the relationship that either feels so precarious that if she asks him about it, then she might get terrible news, or that there's something, I don't even know how to describe it, but the fact that she would be willing to give it up, right? That this really good therapeutic experience is super good, but not so good that she wouldn't consider just like starting all over with someone else, which is hard both logistically and emotionally.
Yeah, there's something about that makes me think she's going to feel rejected if he won't change for her.
Okay.
And that she wants an exit strategy before he disappoints her.
Okay.
Like I can walk away
Like a
from
reason.
you.
Yeah.
hmm Here's what I think the problem is, though. If he had a good reason for not going back,
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't that be different than him doing it for himself? Like say
Good point.
say he's immunocompromised, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe as a kid with a congenital heart defect, and he's like, I can't go back to the office because I can
Right.
keep my family safer. I just have to think that's different than saying, hey, you know what? I like working from home and I can save a ton of money on rent. So I'm
Yeah.
changing the terms of our relationship. I'm now a remote therapist. Like, I
That's
think
a problem.
that would feel hard. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no way to sort out what his motivations are without asking him.
I think that's right. Well, because there are some people who only practice remote, but that's the terms of the agreement when they start.
Yeah, you knew it ahead of time.
Right. And so this is a change she didn't consent to and that she doesn't totally understand.
Mm-hmm.
And so as always, I'm going to say you got to talk about it, but I wonder
I think
what
she's
is
right, though.
scary about it.
I think she's right she's kind of assuming that he's not coming back, because it is, given where we are now, unless he may or may not have a reason that she thinks is acceptable. But
right.
I don't know. I think you got to gamble and just find out what he's going to do, what his plans are.
And I think you're right that it matters, because I think I would also want to be working with a person with integrity and who had values that I could respect.
Well, isn't it
whatever
weird that
those were?
Isn't it weird that the therapist hasn't communicated what the plan is?
Yeah.
I mean, if I had people that I had been seeing in person, I would be
right.
I don't know. I would say, well, let's give this 3 more months, or I'm watching this data point, or I don't know.
Right.
I think it's really weird that she's in the dark about it.
I think that's right. I mean, or people, I went back to my office and I would address it, or people would say, oh, wow, you're back in your office. Are you seeing people in person yet? Right. I mean, like right away, day one. And so I think this is curious. I mean, maybe he's just still at home. I had one patient who was sure that I was back in my office because I was seeing everyone else in person but her, which was an interesting twist on that. But yeah, like when I'm there, I'm there. Everybody can come.
Mm-hmm. It sounded contradictory to me to say that you can disclose things or be more candid due to the distance of a video call, but that she felt safer face to face.
I agree. I mean, I think that it's more candid over Zoom. I have experienced with a couple people. I think that works insofar as it might be easier to give information or tell a story, right? Maybe to experience an emotion that you, I don't know, are embarrassed or want to keep from the therapist. But that feels like that would be the safety. But then, yeah, being there, feeling more safe. I don't know. But again, is it more safe to come undone? Is it more safe to explore, but you can't give as much information? I don't know. I think she's kind of ambivalent about this.
See, I see that as a negative, almost saying I can detach from you sufficiently because it's the video.
Oh,
that
sure.
I can now disclose this. I think that's kind of a problem.
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying it's good, but I can see how it's appealing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Right. Like there are many things that kind of work until they don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how to say that better, but
she's feeling both sides of that, I guess.
I think she is. I think she's ambivalent, maybe about the closeness, but definitely about losing him, about either pushing it or sending up an ultimatum. Because she says the kind of therapy I crave, I think, is she just meaning face-to-face therapy?
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, she's making it's going to be a deal breaker, it sounds like.
I kind of think so.
And again, I'm like you said earlier, I'm a little surprised only because she seems so attached. That's what I mean. There's something the therapist is being too withholding or too, I don't know.
Too boundaried about, like we're supposed to have good boundaries, but talking about what's happening with your patients, including probably where the therapy takes place, does not seem like too much.
Right.
Like that's not a lot of disclosure.
Right. And just like we said, some of the boundaries around COVID, we had to relax a bit. So you should probably be saying, I mean, it would be, I think, permissible to be a little more, disclosing of what your personal situation might be, especially given that probably every other therapist is in person, unless they have a very clear reason.
I don't know. I mean, I am going to say I know lots of therapists that aren't back in person, or at least several. Some have what I would call good reasons and some don't. I think
Well, the
there's
ones
a
that
few
don't,
people.
because they just decided they want to work from home, right?
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
right.
But it's not like every other therapist is all back. But I think then they just have to advertise themselves as a teletherapist only.
I still think that would have been a conversation you'd have had about 6 months ago, a year ago. Like,
I would like to think that everyone who is out has a good reason. I would like to think that everyone who is not back in is discussing this with their patients and coming to some kind of understanding that everybody can live with. I wish it wasn't incumbent on this patient to push it with her therapist, but it sounds like she's at a breaking point, and so she's going to have to bring it up.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, you just said all the right things, but I'm guessing you have some anecdotes that you may not be able to share here where people are they're not going back and they don't have good reasons and they're being cagey about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I hear this from, friends basically in
Mhm.
therapy that their therapists have just kind of stayed away, and it's kind of an open question. I mean,
Mhm.
the listeners can be happy to note that I'm just as annoying in real life as on the podcast. And I'm like, sounds like you should talk to him about that. Wow. That sounds like a question for your therapist.
Yeah.
But partly because I want these people to be not held to task, but like at least just held accountable for what they're doing. I
Mhm.
think these patients, all patients are vulnerable. And I think we owe them that transparency and including the discussion of like, is this working for you? We
Mhm.
used to see each other in person. Now we don't. What is that like? What's lost? Even
Mhm.
if the hard reality is you're never going to come back, right? I mean, I still think like not acknowledging and not processing a big change doesn't really make sense.
Mhm. I want to go back and revise then what I said earlier that maybe there's a fear that she has a feeling rejected or that he won't change. I think
Yeah.
maybe the fear is that she'll find out that her therapist is actually a jerk.
I
The-
like that.
Yeah, this person that you've actually, developed some
Kind of idealized.
care for and idealized, actually, as it turns out, is a jackass. So.
Well, because part of the arrangement, of therapy is this person is supposed to care about you and put your needs before theirs, at least for that 45 minutes. And
Yeah.
I think you're right. If, their need to, be wearing slippers in their den is bigger than your need to heal your trauma, then like, yeah, that's going to feel like garbage.
Yeah, yeah. At least I have the conversation. I'm so sorry, but I have to stay home in my slippers, right?
Right. Right.
This is
It's
all I can
like,
offer you at this point.
and then I would be like, you know what, man, wear your slippers in the office. I'll accept you, right? Like we can loosen up the dress code. Like if we're going to be loose all over. Anyway. So hopefully, Ariana, we answered your question. I'd be curious about a follow-up from anyone, but there's a lot of unanswered questions here. So I hope it goes well.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks to Ariana and our anonymous listener for taking the time to send in your questions. And we thank all of you for listening. Please send in your questions by email or an audio message. We love to get those at our website, callthepsychiatrist.com. We'd love to see you on Instagram and Facebook at Call the Psychiatrist. And if you've gotten any benefit from the show, we'd really appreciate it if you'd write a review wherever you listen. Take care.
Bye.